It's Rob and Sandra from My Wife the Dietitian here with this week's episode of Nutrition Nuggets.
Hi, Rob.
Hello, Sandra. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good.
Good.
What are we talking about today?
We're talking about the potassium-sodium ratio, balance for blood pressure.
Okay. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, and this one's a midweek mini, so it's a little bit of a snapshot of ways to get more potassium and less sodium in our diet.
Right. So sodium is salt. I think everyone's familiar with salt, but what is...
Sodium, actually, they're both salts.
Oh, really?
Sodium and potassium. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's sodium chloride is our table salt, and potassium chloride is an alternative salt that some people use. And we're going to discuss a little bit about that idea of a salt substitute.
Oh, interesting.
But 2% of the U.S. adult population consumes the recommended amount of potassium. Only 2%.
Only 2%, which means 98% aren't getting enough potassium.
And 98% of the U.S. population exceed the recommended amount of sodium.
Yeah. Well,
and do you know why?
Well, because we eat garbage. We eat so much, processed food, ultra-processed food that's, loaded with salts. And, salt is flavoring, right? Anything that has added sort of that dusty flavor, like chips and all those things, that's all just salt.
That's right.
It tastes good, but yeah, you're just adding tons of salt into your diet.
That's right. Like sodium is mainly found in processed and packaged foods, whereas a lot of the potassium-rich foods are in fresh foods that don't have a label.
Right. Well, yeah, there you go. That makes sense. So we've said this lots of times. We're not getting enough of those whole foods.
Exactly.
And because of that, then our potassium is low.
That's right. And fresh foods have naturally low sodium, and they're naturally high in potassium.
Okay. Are we going to maybe have a list of potassium-rich foods?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, that would be helpful. Okay, so you're saying we have to have a balance. We're getting too much sodium and not enough potassium.
Yeah, and the nutrition facts label now show sodium and potassium. But as I mentioned, a lot of the potassium-rich foods don't have labels because they're the vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans and nuts. And
so you're not going to look to some type of a product that has a label as your potassium source. Likely, there's the foods that have potassium don't have labels. Most of them, some of them, any of them, all of them. How about we just move on and we'll figure it out as we go along.
So for the general population, if they increase their potassium intake in their diet, this can offset the high sodium intake in the mortality risk, because having a lot of sodium in the diet, having high blood pressure can lead to cardiovascular disease and can lead to more risk of heart attack and stroke.
Okay.
And so if people could have more potassium-rich foods and less of the sodium intake, that can just reverse that whole problem.
Is there a chemical relationship? Because there was something that, I can't remember what it was we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, where you were saying there was like some sort of relationship between these two foods, and if you eat one, it sort of reduces the effect of the other one in your body or something.
Oh, that was the tuna one we were talking about, mercury and selenium.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. So potassium is an electrolyte in the blood, just like sodium and chloride.
Okay.
So potassium acts with sodium to maintain fluid balance inside cells and transmit nerve impulses and muscle contractions, including the heart muscle. And a lot of people think, oh, electrolytes, okay, I got to drink Gatorade.
Well, yeah, exactly.
But actually, it's more of just getting more like a higher quality diet in terms of more minimally processed whole foods in our diet, with more fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans, legumes, nuts and meat and fish and poultry all have a good amount of potassium and dairy and milk products have potassium that can help with getting enough potassium and less of the sodium if you are eating less of the packaged processed foods.
Yeah, there you go.
Did you know the National Institute of Health did a study, and they showed that 90% of people with high blood pressure underestimate the amount of salt that they're eating. So it's usually from like restaurant foods or frozen meals or takeout, like fast foods. And the U.S. consumers have 25% of their sodium from restaurant foods and takeout foods and fast foods and packaged and processed foods.
But they think they underestimate it, or they do underestimate it.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
I remember talking about that in the sodium episode we did, and
Episode 36.
Episode 36.
Dash of salt.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that the only salt in their diet is what they shake on their food with the salt shaker. But that's probably just a small percentage because there's so much salt in the food already.
Yeah.
And just because you don't taste it doesn't mean it's not there. You know, there's a lot of salt it's just one of the ingredients, and so you're getting a lot of salt even if you're not shaking it on your food.
Yeah, and if you're making food at home, I'm not opposed to adding a bit of salt when you're home cooking, because it's not the same as eating all these processed packaged foods or drive-through. So in a common day, like for a lot of people, they might have a drive-through meal for lunch, say a burger and fries and a pop, or a soda like Coca-Cola. And just that right there is the recommended amount of sodium in that meal, because it's about 2,000 milligrams. And then if you maybe are busy, you've been out all day, and you pop a frozen pizza in the oven, it's pepperoni and cheese pizza, there you go. You're going to double the amount of sodium for your recommended intake of sodium. You're basically doubling what you should be eating.
Crazy.
And in New York City, they actually had a warning. Restaurants had to post any meals that were over 2,300 milligrams of sodium in the meal. And that's actually what the recommended intake for a day is 2,300 milligrams in a day. But they had a warning. They had to post a warning if one meal had that much.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
So part of the campaign with trying to lower the sodium intake and all the warnings was it's actually demonized some good healthy foods such as canned beans or canned tomatoes, which are higher in sodium, but they also are really good. They have a good amount of potassium. And so those are really healthy foods that people aren't eating anymore or not buying. And these foods have good shelf life, they're affordable, and you can add, canned tomatoes to your soups or stews or different foods. And canned beans are a great way to get your legumes. So I think that's one thing that's come out of the
trend to
the public health messages
sodium.
of, reducing sodium. And people are, taking that off their list as or canned fish is another one that people often say, oh, I'm not eating canned fish anymore because it's too high in sodium. But you look at the nutritional value of that food, and then you weigh the risk benefit.
Yeah, I hear you. Makes sense. So let's talk about some potassium-rich foods. I want the list.
I want you to tell me what you think.
I don't. Well, the only one I know is bananas.
Yeah, avocado has like 3 times as much.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah. Avocados. So avocado, potato, baked potato, potassium's water soluble. So when you boil potatoes, you lose the potassium.
Oh, well, don't you boil them for mashed potatoes?
Yeah.
Oh, you said a baked potato is good for potassium.
Exactly.
But you're not going to get as much in mashed potatoes because it's been boiled.
That's right.
Okay, that's a good tip.
Yeah. And there is, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but there's certain people in the population that should watch their potassium intake. But this is more for the general population, trying to control blood pressure and trying to get that balance of more potassium-rich foods and less sodium foods in the diet.
Okay.
For potassium, the recommended daily intake for women is 2,600 milligrams, and for men, it's 3,400 milligrams. And the average intake is 2,300 milligrams. So people do fall short. As I mentioned at the start, only 2% of the U.S. adult population consumes the recommended amount of potassium in their diet. And it's because it's mostly in like those whole foods of fresh foods, vegetables, fruits, beans, meats, fish, poultry, dairy, whole grains, nuts.
And what do we, sorry, say, it sounded like they were pretty close though. Like we're not way under, but we're under. Like we're supposed to get men 3,000 and we're only getting 23.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Correct.
Oh yeah, I guess that's.
So people think, oh, should I take a potassium supplement? Because that's kind of the Band-Aid effect, and it's an easy way to do it, but it's not recommended. There's, potassium supplements, there's salt substitutes that are potassium instead of sodium.
Right.
That you shake on. Like New Salt is one, I think, or it's potassium chloride.
Okay.
And
they're not recommended, you said?
Not generally, partly because if you're using one of those, most people that use supplements don't necessarily change their diet, or
they're still getting a lot of salt in the majority of the food they're eating. So yeah, like we were saying before, like the salt that you add to your food with a shaker is probably just a small percentage of the actual salt that you're taking in through your diet.
Yeah, that's right.
So
yeah.
a better change would be to change the food you're eating rather than what you're shaking on it.
Exactly. And whole foods are better, so they work together for health. Like there's different nutrients in whole foods, that not just the potassium, there's the antioxidants, there's the different vitamins and other minerals. And so they all work in concert together. And that's why eating food, the whole food, you're going to get all those nutrients and not just the supplement, not just the single.
The food package, you call it, right? Yeah. All the things that come with that food.
Exactly.
All the different nutrients make up the food package.
That's right.
Whereas a supplement is just one.
And the other thing with supplements is they're really easy to overdo and get too much of.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And there is a risk. People that are on certain medications, like a diuretic, that can lower their potassium tolerance. If they have kidney function issues or chronic kidney failure, they have to watch how much potassium.
Okay.
So the most common cause of too much potassium in the blood is kidney disease.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And there's such a link with diabetes. So it's growing. I mean, kidney disease is growing. Diabetes epidemic is growing. And it's all connected. And so...
Connected to what?
People that are developing diabetes, it's a lifestyle disease. And then if they have it long enough, it affects their kidneys, and their kidneys don't work properly.
Oh, diabetes is connected to kidney disease.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. A lot
crazy.
of the people having dialysis and with renal problems have diabetes. So in that population, the potassium might be a different issue.
Oh, wow.
Most people can benefit from reducing the amount of sodium in their diet and increasing their potassium, unless they're having kidney problems and they have high blood potassium. And as I mentioned, the most common cause of too much potassium in the blood is kidney disease.
Well, there you go.
So potassium-rich foods, you mentioned banana, and we talked about potato.
Potato, banana, and avocado. That's what I've got on my list so far.
Okay, kiwi.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're
Kiwi.
Really high in potassium. Remember, I just had
Wow.
one this morning. It said, oh, this is a really high potassium breakfast, because it was oatmeal, and it had flaxseed in it, and it had some walnuts are high, dried fruit. So dried currants are really high in potassium. Mango, bran, and whole grain.
That's interesting.
Dairy, so milk, yogurt, any dairy food is high in potassium.
That's quite
Tomato.
a range of different types of food.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. So there's lots of options for people to get more potassium in their diet.
Oh, orange juice and oranges are really high in potassium. That's one of the electrolyte solutions that if someone's dehydrated, you can drink orange juice with a dash of salt in it. And then that gives you the glucose and the sodium and the potassium.
There you go.
And tomato juice is similar because it's got the potassium and the sodium.
Right.
So some key takeaway messages for better blood pressure. So the first one, and we're going to just do 3. The first one would be to increase the amount of foods with no labels.
So all your whole foods, fruit and vegetables, all those, because they're higher in potassium.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And they're naturally high in fiber and fluid, and they're usually loaded with phytochemicals, antioxidants,
All the good
those
stuff.
good things. Yeah, exactly. So aim for that 5 a day of vegetables and fruits because they're naturally low in sodium and high in potassium.
Perfect.
Okay, the second takeaway is don't rely on potassium supplements or salt substitutes or electrolyte drinks to get your potassium.
Right, because that's like, did you said supplement as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we talked about that. When you get the whole package of everything else that comes with the whole food versus just a single potassium hit.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And the last key takeaway is maybe one less trip through the drive-through a week.
Yeah, because that's a huge source of salt, sodium, and we're trying to reduce that.
Exactly.
So the fast food, the processed food, the ultra-processed food.
Packaged food.
All that stuff. Yeah, try to reduce that.
Yeah, that's it.
There you go. That's all we need to know. Well, thanks for sharing that, Sandra. That's another good little tidbit of information for everyone to pack away into their nutrition part of their brain. Thanks for joining us today. We will be back next Monday. I think we are. What are we doing next Monday? We don't know yet, but we've got a whole bunch of cool stuff lined up. So yeah, make sure to join us then. And you can check out our YouTube and our Facebook page and our Instagram page. Those are all My Wife the Dietitian. If you have questions for us or comments, you can email us at mywifetherd@gmail.com. There's lots of blog articles on the not the Facebook page. Well, they're on the Facebook page too, but on the website at mywifethedietitian.com. And if you're liking the show, don't forget to rate and review. That really helps us move things forward here. So that's always appreciated. That is it for this week then. Have a good week, everyone. We will talk to you next Monday. Thanks for joining us today on My Wife the Dietitian. If you like what you heard, don't be shy. Leave us a comment or review, and be sure to share our podcast with your friends. If you'd like to hear more, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on our social media pages for updates, episode trailers, and other odds and ends. For more info and links on what we discussed on today's episode, check the show notes. We'll be back next week with another informative and fun-filled episode.